Do you remember the first time, I don't know if you do, when you were at a school, maybe at an event, maybe it was an FFA event, maybe it was a student council retreat, and a person up front would say, our lesson today is going to be on trust. It's all about trust. So we're going to do the trust fall. And so somebody would they'd say, partner up with somebody, and what we want you to do is just lay back and let them catch you. And I don't know if you've seen that or done something like that. I don't know, you'd try to find somebody you trusted, hopefully not somebody who's too ornery, and I know a lot of you guys are kind of ornery around here. But anyway, trusting people has always been hard for us. And I don't know, for various reasons and various things, but trusting God, it's really hard for us too. Trusting that He is going to work everything out for good for those that love Him and are called to His purpose, as Romans 8:28 says. Trusting God's plans, because sometimes His plans are different than our own personal plans. Trusting Him in the middle of all the circumstances that are going to come into our lives. Sometimes circumstances are very hard ones. I could tell you about the parents of a little grandson that they had. He was in St. Jude's Hospital, pediatric cancer, and the little boy didn't make it. But there were so many prayers that were going up for him. Or about the teenager that was fighting leukemia, who her prayers seemed to be unanswered. Or about the parents of the prodigal son or daughter that had gone off to college and walked away from the Lord, from the Bible, from all the things that they had been taught. And the prayers of the parents that were going up. In this sermon series, The Difference Jesus Makes, we've been looking at gospel accounts and stories and how Jesus makes a difference. Today we're going to talk about an unordinary approach to earn trust. Here's I think the most famous verse on trust, at least in my mind. It's Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not unto your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. This is a great verse. I remember memorizing it when I was in college as a guy who was going through a lot of hard times in life. This kind of became a theme verse to me, that I would trust the Lord in life no matter what or where or when. Reminds us of what our focus should be and who we're to lean on when times get tough and when whatever direction our life takes us. Trust in the Lord with all of our hearts. Now, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to trust in the Lord with all of your heart? Why would you want to do that? I don't know. If you're looking in a sermon outline this week that's in the bulletin, I've got some of it there. I've got more of it for you. But I've got several points. And these points will all run together as I build them together to make just one sentence. Now, the first point is, since God is God. The first thing that I want to establish with you, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is what we're going to have to acknowledge, is that God is God. Acknowledge that He is our higher power. He is the power, the divine power. He is the one, the only true God, the God of the universe, who created and made this world. Now, I remember in the Scriptures there was a time where it gives description of God making the world. It's in Jeremiah 10. It says, "But God made the earth by His power. He founded the world by His wisdom and stretched out the heavens by His understanding. When He thunders, the waters in the heavens roar. He makes clouds rise from the ends of the earth. He sends lightning with the rain, and He brings out the wind from His storehouses." Like, where's that wind come from that's here in Kansas all the time? I guess God's got it. Where do those clouds come? I can see them sometimes coming from afar. Here in Kansas, you can really see compared to Louisiana or other places like that. Where, He just makes all these things come. God is God. In this world, I think that all of us have realized the presence of God, the power of God, and the personal God that loves each and every one of us. I hope you realize that. How could anyone ever conclude that there wasn't a superior being that looks at this world in which we live. One of my favorite classes in college was defending our faith, and one of the favorite arguments in that class that I really latched onto in my mind was the argument of design. Where'd this world come from if there wasn't a God who designed it? Kathy and I one time got to go to, it's a Vanderbilt home. It's called the Biltmore Estate. It's 178,926 square foot, kind of a big house. I'd hate to heat and cool it, now wouldn't you? It's on 6,950 acres, a little over 10 square miles. This guy, when he built this house in the late 1800s. It's the largest privately owned home in the United States. It took 6 years to build it, from 1889 to 1895. Now, if I had been escorted, it's in the kind of the mountains of North Carolina, Asheville. If I'd been escorted into that place and seen that big mansion, which it took us over a day to look through it, and I didn't even get to see it all. If somebody would have said, well, it was just a big bang, and this house appeared out of nowhere. I wouldn't have bought that. I said, you're out of your mind. You're kind of crazy. Well, I know some people will say that that's where the world came from. It was just a big bang, and all of a sudden, some people believe that that's where the existence of our world came. I remember having to study in biology and different things you'd have to study, like the eye and the anatomy of the eye and the intricacy of an eye. Do you think that could just all of a sudden boom and it happens? I don't know. And the heart, I've had to memorize the parts of the heart. And so just stay with me on this. And since God is God, and I believe that He is, then here's the second part of my message. And since He is in control, it's a given to me that God is God. But I want to stop and I want to settle a little bit more on this point of since He is in control. I don't know if you remember in the Old Testament, there was this fellow named Job. And all of a sudden, if you read this chapter, it's like his life is just falling apart. And for a span of time, he's questioning God about why has all of this happened to me? Why? And then God, in Job chapter 38, begins to ask him a series of questions. Where are you when I laid the earth's foundations? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? And where were its footing set? And who laid its cornerstone? And God spends the next couple of chapters in Job, and He asks questions that only He would even ask, or definitely only that He could answer. And God is creatively explaining to Job that God is the creator and that Job is the creation. Since God is God and since He is in control, when we say that He is in control, what we're doing is we're admitting something else. When we say God is in control, we're admitting we're not in control. We are not the ones that are in control. We must trust Him in good times and in bad times. We must believe in Him that He will not allow us to go through more than we're able to stand. Another scripture. We don't know how things are going to turn out. One of my favorite stories that's in the Old Testament is in Daniel chapter 3. Maybe you remember these guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Anyway, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue, 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Well, anyway, you get the idea. I don't know. I remember watching the guy paint that last little part up there and the scaffolding that he had. Well, about twice this height. And people were, as it says, I'll keep reading. When you hear the sound of the horn, and of course it lists a bunch of other instruments and other musical instruments, bow to the ground and worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, verse 12 says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you. Your Majesty, they refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue that you have set up. Well, Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. I don't know, what do you look like when you're really mad? Well, his face got really, really mad. And he commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than normal. Put in more stuff and more coal and more wood, whatever it takes. We're going to heat this baby up. Then he ordered some of the strong men, he got some of his mighty men, big dudes, Navy SEALs, I guess. Anyway, strongest men of the army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants and turbans and robes and other garments. And because the king in his anger had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. But suddenly Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in his amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, Your Majesty, we certainly did," they replied. "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 men unbound, walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like the Son of God." What if, you'd have been Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and the king says, "Come on out of the fire." I think after the other story about the mighty men, I might have been saying, "No, come over here, King Nebuchadnezzar, get a little closer. Come in here, it's okay." No, but not these guys. They came out of the fire, and it was really weird. Not a hair on their head was singed. They didn't smell like smoke. They were all well and alive, except for, I guess, that burned up the ropes that were on them, holding them. King Nebuchadnezzar then said, if you keep reading the chapter, he said, "If you don't bow down and worship the God of these 3 men, then you'll be cut into little pieces and your houses will be torn down." After they cut me into little pieces, I probably wouldn't even care about my house being torn down, I don't know, but... What was the highlight of the story? Well, to me, the highlight of the story, you say, well, God grief, they burn up. Well, here's the highlight of the story to me, is verse 16 to 18. It says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, this is when they were first accused, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, Your Majesty. But even if He doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, Your Majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you have set up." It's like, notice, realize, see. These guys' trust was not contingent upon what was going to happen. If it was going to happen like they wanted, they made that decision long before they were thrown into the fire. In the Old Testament writings, when it uses the word God in the Hebrew, lots of times it will have another, a little bit more of a meaning. Here it's El Elyon, which means the God who is in control. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar, you might be the king of this land, but there is a king who is over kings. And since God is God and He is in control, we're going to trust and worship Him. God is in control. We're going to worship the God who is really in control. Now, what if I were to try to earn your trust? What if I were, how would I go about earning your trust? Well, if you're at the bank, I guess I would always pay my bills on time. I would make sure that, I've always had a pretty good credit rating, 700, 800, something like that. And make sure my credit rating was high because I do what I say. Or well, what if I just picked you individually and I was going to try to prove to you that I wanted to earn your trust? Well, if I were to do that, I'd probably tell you something and then go make sure I did it and say, look, I did that, and go do this. And I would be showing you. Well, God does it a little bit different. The scripture says that God's ways are not our ways, and His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And Jesus uses unorthodox ways to reveal His identity to us. And many times, it's through the tough things that we have to go through. There were 2 different women in the Gospels. Both of them did the very same thing to Jesus. I don't know if you know what they did. they wiped Jesus' feet with their hair. They wiped their feet. They wiped Jesus' feet with their hair. Now, both of them were very grateful. The first one was grateful that she could be forgiven, for she was a woman who had sinned a lot, but Jesus had forgiven her. And she was so grateful when she realized what he'd done that she washed his feet with her hair. But there was another one. The other one is, let me tell you a little bit more about her. This is the second one. Second grateful woman. A dinner was prepared in Jesus' honor. Martha served, and Lazarus was among those who ate with him. Then Mary took a 12-ounce jar of expensive perfume made from the essence of nard, and she anointed Jesus' feet with it, wiping his feet with her hair. Now, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus were some very rich people. This bottle of perfume, Judas said, hey, this could have been sold for like $50,000 or $60,000. And he said, why didn't they do that and give the money to the poor? Why didn't they do that? Well, this lady had something that had happened to her that made her so thankful. Well, I don't know. As I go back, John chapter 11, verse 3. So the two sisters sent a message to Jesus telling him, Lord, your dear friend is very sick. All of a sudden, Jesus out doing the things that he normally would do. He was healing the sick. He was teaching people. And all of a sudden, he gets a telegram. The one you love is sick. Where Mary and Martha and Lazarus had become his friends, probably very supportive in helping him in ministry and things. Verse 4 of this 11th chapter said, when Jesus heard this, he said to his disciples, the sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, that God's Son may be glorified. But then John inserts something. He says, he inserts these words as if, we needed to get them. He said, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Well, when Jesus gets the message, you'd think he'd immediately get his backpack and grab the disciples and say, we're going to Judea. We better hurry because my bro needs me. Lazarus needs me. But that's not what Jesus did. Now, Jesus loved Martha and Lazarus and Mary, and John writes that in there. John, he would probably be a bad producer because he kind of puts in the script things that it'd be like spoiler alert. He's saying, oh, but Jesus really loved them. Well, the sisters are waiting, and when Jesus returns in a few days to heal their sick brother, he's already dead. He's not there. If you'd have just been here, he wouldn't have died. If you'd have just been here, Jesus. Mary says it to Jesus at one point, and Martha says it to Jesus at one point. And we might read over the story and act like it's really, not that big a deal. But I bet they were really mad because they knew the power that Jesus had. Why didn't you come? I think there was a bite in what they were saying to Jesus. Jesus was moved. It says there he began to weep. And he said, take me to the gravesite. Let's remove the stone. They said, no, you don't want to remove the stone. He's been dead for 4 days. Sometimes the King James Version is the best of all. It says, Lord, by this time he stinketh. He stinketh. For he's been dead 4 days. Why would you open the tomb of a person who's been dead 4 days? The smell's going to be putrid. It was going to kill us. And Jesus knows what he's doing. Do you know that the Lord is never late and the Lord is never early, but the Lord is always right on time? Now, we sometimes think he's late. Well, to prove that Lazarus really was dead, they rolled the stone away, and boy, I'm sure everyone winced and went, whoa. And if you grew up going to church, when I read these guys' names a while ago, you said Lazarus, oh yeah, I remember that name. Jesus would cup his hands and he would say, Lazarus, come forth. Or, he says words kind of like that, and all of a sudden he comes stumbling out. Well, this is the woman, Mary. But these are the words that are there. So although Jesus loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days. It doesn't fit the setting. Why is it written in the middle of this story that this is inserted there? On at least 2 different occasions in the Gospel of John, he talks about Judas Iscariot, and he says, the one who would deny, who would betray the Lord. And it's just like I said, it's like he would be a terrible movie producer. He's kind of putting things in that you need to leave to the end of the story. But have you ever felt like God didn't show up when you needed Him? Maybe it's your marriage is in the worst possible place it could ever be, and you say, Lord, you've got to intervene, you've got to show up, you've got to fix our marriage. But maybe He's not doing that. Or maybe there's tension in a friendship and things are getting worse instead of better, and you're begging for God's involvement, but it doesn't seem to be coming. Maybe you have a grandson that you've been praying for. I prayed with Monique Lawrence so many times about that little grandson that passed away at St. Jude's. Maybe it's I don't know, a prayer that you have prayed. Maybe you prayed, Lord, if you don't come through now, I'm telling you, the way these numbers are going, I'm going to have to file bankruptcy at the end of the month. Are you willing to worship a God who makes you wait? Are you willing to worship a God who makes you wait? Are you willing to trust a God whose unconventional methods unfold according to His timetable and not yours? Jesus waits 4 days, and the smell of death is unmistakable. He wants people to know that He is the Son of God, that He is the Messiah. No wonder it says, although Jesus loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus, He stayed where He was for the next 2 days. He loved them, but He had stayed where He was. Since God is God, and I believe that He is, and since He is in control, the third thing I share is we should trust the one who knows the entire story. You know, life is not like a Disney movie where in the last 15 minutes everything is all worked out and resolved and everybody lives happily ever after. You know, there are terrorists today that behead Christians. There is cancer and it still wounds. There are companies that are getting smaller and downsizing and people will be laid off. There are drunk drivers that are out on the roads that will wreak havoc. People will die and 4 days later they'll still be dead. And so you need to decide right here and right now whether or not you will believe that God is still God, whether God is in control, and whether you can trust Him with your story. John inserts, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. It's just another way of saying, I trust the one who knows the entire story. You know, there are some cases that don't just all come together like a Disney movie in life. I've found the more time that you spend with Jesus, the more you see God's hand and feel God's comfort and experience and God's provision, it's easier to trust Him. You know, the trust, lots of times, it doesn't come when everything's going in the good times. It comes when things are going through some of the bad times. You know, I want to talk to you a little bit about my journey of trust. I grew up in a blended family. I don't think I've ever said that before. My mom lost her husband when he was serving in the military. He'd been a pilot after World War II. His plane crashed, and that baby boy, my brother Jerry, my half-brother Jerry, was not even 2 years old. After dealing with a lot of grief and a lot of depression, my mother found herself with a baby by herself. A few years later, 4 or 5, she met my dad. And I was born 10 years after Jerry was born. My dad and mom were in church, but my dad went through a lot of problems and job changes when he was a filling station owner for a while, worked on cars and did things of that nature. He at one point became an over-the-road truck driver, which caused a lot of stress in our family. As a kid growing up, my dad wasn't always there. Remember one time that he came into town and he called my mom and said, I have another thing. He'd been gone 2 weeks driving. And he said, I've got another thing. And I think my mom had said, when we come back, you're going to talk. And he became the dispatcher of all those trucks after that moment in time. I remember when I was about 10, my dad was now a postman, and he stayed a postman for 30-some years. But my mom worked for the welfare department. And I remember when my mom was in a crash, when a drunk driver hit her from behind, and she was in the hospital for over a month. And it really changed a lot of things in my life at that point in time. She was hit by a drunk driver, off work for close to a year. In high school, I went through a lot of things growing up because there was a lot of racial stress that was going on in the South. I don't know. I was to attend a school where I was in the minority. There were 2,000 kids that were black and 70 some that were white, and my parents just felt like that they were worried about me, and because of the attention that was in fights that were going on in the schools. And I went to a private school all the time. I had to get a job if I was 14, and my dad took extra jobs, and we just made through. I remember when I was 14, I made a decision to follow the Lord with my life. I was going to work and serve in full-time service, and I didn't know if I'd be an elder in the church, like some of the men that are here in this church really working hard, or if I went through a couple of relationships that, oh my goodness, I thought the one that I was involved with was going to be the wife that I had all of my life, or something of that nature. And boy, that didn't happen. And boy, anyway, just things have gone up. But lots of times things have been down, and I just mentioned to you some of the down things in life to let you know God has taken care of me through all of those things. I got off the interstate last night, and as I say, we've got, Kathy has a mom and a stepmom, and both of them are in the hospital right now with heart attacks. But God is taking care of us, and God will continue to take care of us. And I trust God, no matter what. Since God is God, and since God is in control, we should trust the one who knows the entire story. And I tell you just a little bit about my journey of trust, but I encourage you, maybe you ought to go home and you ought to look at your own trust journey. God gets you to trust Him not by keeping His credit score so high, or not by saying, watch me do this, I'm going to do this, you can trust me. No. He will send you through some problems and some things in life, and when you have nowhere else to turn, absolutely nowhere, that's when you will finally begin to learn to trust Him. I don't know what you're going through, or I don't know what you've been through. I don't even, I'm kind of... When I got home, when I got into my office this morning, I met the new preacher. It's like a stuffed doll or something that was sitting in my, it's a lady. I got news for you guys. There's a lady, it's a lady. She's got gray hair. Anyway, I don't know. I got her in my office still in there. If y'all want to see her after church, I'll bring her out. But anyway, introduce you to her. But anyway, I don't know what God's got in control. I mean, I know God's in control. I don't know what God has planned for this church. My prayers are for somebody a lot sharper and a lot better than the dude that's up here. I hope his hair is not gray. Maybe he can have cool hair. I have better, really cool hair instead of, hey, have hair. Would you read this verse with me? John 11:5. But I want you to insert your name there. John 11:5. And Jesus loved. That's right. Jesus loves you. Even though you may be going through some stuff sometimes, even though this stuff is all over the place, Jesus loves you.